The Committee of the Intelligence and Security Services of Africa was established in 2004 with the approval of the African Union, the AU, and became the intelligence arm of the African Union. There are 51 member states, and they are all head of their respective state intelligence services. The purpose of the CISSA is a continent-wide forum for multilateral cooperation on intelligence and security matters. It facilitates dialogue, analysis, knowledge sharing, coordination, and adoption of common strategies among intelligence and knowledge sharing security organizations in Africa. Part of the challenge will be to get the states, the CSA, and the AU all on the same page, as there are many moving parts. Since there's 51 states and each state has their own national security and different agendas, it will be important for the CISSA to be focused on the goal, and that goal being fighting terrorism and corruption. The emergence of al-Shabaab in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria, al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, and now the declaration of the Islamic State of Syria, or Daesh, of a caliphate in the Middle East, makes the task more urgent than ever before. The United States is now beginning to understand that the war on terrorism is not just in the Middle East, that it's not just a Middle East problem, but it is a global problem, and in particular Africa. The original strategy of the Obama administration was to focus on the Sahel region, which was the weaker and vulnerable state, and this is where America's African Command, or AFRICOM, was created. The Sahel region, which is the large swath of territory extending from Senegal to the Horn of Africa that constitutes the southern edge of the Sahara Desert. It is home to America's weakest and poorest economies, as well as the largest ungoverned spaces in the region, as well as most of its religious beliefs are of Muslim faith. Since 9/11, it has also been the focus of the United States security policy in Africa. In 2007, the U.S. military created the Africa Command, or AFRICOM, in large part to coordinate the fight against growing Islamic fundamentalism in the Sahel, particularly in the Horn of Africa. The United States is making use of drones currently as part of their strategy in defeating Daesh and other terrorist groups in Africa, with the Horn of Africa being a target area in Ethiopia. In 2014, AFRICOM conducted 68 operations, 11 major joint operations, and 595 security cooperation activities. The previous year, it conducted 55 operations, 10 major joint exercises, and 481 security cooperation activities. There are two well-known organizations that are helping, which gives the CISSA a little bit more credibility and legitimacy. The first of those organizations, and is considered its regional neighbors, is that of the European Union, or the EU. At its narrowest point, only 15 kilometers separate Europe and Africa in the Strait of Gibraltar. Partially due to their close proximity, relations between the two countries have always been intertwined. Throughout history, the prosperity, stability, and security of one region has directly affected the other. Recent events in North Africa and the influx of Tunisian and Liberian migrants to European shores have only underscored this connection and at times tension. The European Union is made up of 28 member states that are mostly located through Europe, which include countries such as France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom. Those are a few of the founding members of the EU, and in some circles around the world, the EU is considered to be the world's current or potential superpower. The EU collectively is the biggest contributor to the African Union, supporting 85% of the AU's budget. Corruption is also one of the biggest challenges that face the CISSA daily, and again, it could be directly or indirectly. There's no question that corruption has long been a running problem throughout Africa, from government officials, law enforcement, local servants, and tax collectors. In some cases and in some states, it is common knowledge and an acceptable practice of bribery in which there is no such lack of trust in the system. And some feel that it's just easier to pay somebody off rather than take care of the problem. With corruption being so widespread, it is apparent that corruption could have infiltrated the CISSA. Once again, 3 of the bottom 10 countries are from the Middle East and the North Africa region: Iraq, Libya, and the Sudan. The ongoing devastating conflicts in these and other countries inevitably mean that any efforts to strengthen institutions and the states have taken a back seat. How would a region such as Africa be able to positively and effectively try to stabilize the region? But more importantly, what role would the African Union play? Through the financial support of the European Union, and with the EU and Africa having so many mutual interests, including the fight on terrorism and corruption. In 2007, the joint Africa-EU strategy was adopted at the Lisbon Summit, which brought together leaders of the 27 European and 54 African states, as well as the presidents of the continental institutions. The African Union then created a division called the CISSA. The AU is funded by the EU, and with the funding of the EU, the AU, the African Union, was able to establish the CISSA, which again is the intelligence arm of the AU and its countries. It is my observation that there's just something amiss with the CISSA. But given that there are many lapses of security that allow terror groups in the East, West, and North Africa to wreak so much mayhem that have accumulated in the recent deadly atrocities in Libya, Kenya, and of course Nigeria. Many observers and critics believe the CISSA has, by and large, failed to execute its mandate. It is instead of the CISSA being the bottom-up organization, it is top-to-bottom organization, with strings being pulled by the EU in either direction, whether that be indirectly or directly. One must also keep in mind that China looms large over the continent of Africa and is a threat as well. Another organization which is redeveloping relationships with the African Union is that of the North American Treaty Organization, or NATO. This is an organization which, if someone attacks one member, that is a deemed attack on all members. Some of the countries that are in NATO include the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, to name a few. The CISSA is a very covert and secret group in which no one really knows what their actual role is when it comes to fighting terrorism and corruption in Africa. The CISSA, for all intents and purposes, is made up of all the leaders of the member countries of intelligence in Africa. It is supposed to assist the African Union and all its institutions is to effectively address the seemingly intertraceable security challenges confronting Africa. It was also conceived as a mechanism of dialogue, study, analysis, consulting, concerting, and adopting common strategies towards security changes among intelligence and security organizations in Africa. There are several challenges that face the CISSA and its effectiveness as an organization, whether that be directly or indirectly. First and foremost, the issue of terrorism is a major problem in that region. It does not seem to be getting any better. With the rise of Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab in Somalia and Kenya, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, the AQIM in the Islamic State in Libya and Egypt. How do you get rid of outside forces who use their financial and political will to make sure that they have a hand in how things are going? And how do you get rid of corruption, authoritarianism, and dictatorships so that weak states can become stronger? It is clear that the CISSA cannot remain in place because of the more likely penetration of corruption throughout not only the CISSA but the African Union as well. Currently, the president of the African Union is the president of Chad, who is President Derby, and he's been in office for 25 years, and he has been known to let terrorism. He's been known to harbor Boko Haram in Chad after their attacks. So, and he's built up the military there to kind of make sure he stays in power. So that's a part of the corruption and dictatorship. Uh, I think it was best. Currently, most states in Africa have some form of intelligence service. So the best plan of action would be have a form of the United States Patriot Act and have government reforms as well as enacted into their state constitutions. Um, there was an article that was written by Tabia Princewell, uh, who wrote an article called Nigeria Fighting Corruption. And he said, we need a Patriot Act where he talks about how it would change Nigeria. Quote, I believe the Patriot Act should be adopted to tackle corruption, those guilty or suspected of sponsoring either religious violence and generally putting our national concord at risk. There needs to be an accountability and there needs to be accountability when talking about intelligence and national security. The African Patriot Act would be a great start in the right direction to having some form of accountability and democracy.